So the US government plans to issue guidance and impose sanctions to clamp down on ransomware attacks. The Treasury Department is expected to announce the actions this week, which will focus on payments. So the Wall Street Journal reported last week, and they said that additional anti-money laundering regulations may also take effect that will bar crypto payments for illegal uses such as paying ransoms. So interesting development. I think we all saw this coming. It's interesting that they're focusing on crypto payments when we've seen time and time again that crypto payments used in ransomware attacks can be traced. They're very transparent, and we've been able to find those funds, especially when we look at the Colonial pipeline. So Naomi, I'm going to kick this right off to you. Do you think we're focusing on the wrong thing here? Should we rather be focusing on cybersecurity when it comes to protecting companies like the Colonial pipeline?
That's such a loaded question, Jen, because you know exactly what I'm going to say.
I know.
Do you think that we're perhaps focusing on the wrong thing, Naomi? Yes, 100%. So Emin Sarah had a great tweet about this, which I wholeheartedly agree with, where he said, repeat after me, stop trying to use the financial system in order to prosecute crimes after the fact. The root cause of ransomware attacks is the weak state of computer security, not the mechanism used for payments. This has always been the case with Bitcoin. When they're talking about money laundering, when they're talking about all these things, and they're focusing on the medium of exchange rather than the actual criminals, right? And then when you think like cash is also used for money laundering, and they're not banning that. Well, actually, they are kind of banning that and phasing that out, but that's a kind of a different side. They're not using it, the money laundering side of that, to phase that out. But, you know, it's just, I hate when they do this and they're just completely missing the point that people need to be beefing up their security. We are living in a completely different era where cybersecurity, you know, computer security needs to be first and foremost in people's minds, and people just miss the point, and then they get into all sorts of issue, and then they ask the government to come in and regulate Bitcoin, of all things, to save them. Is such a non sequitur for me, when really, you know, we need to be focusing on the fact that the government is overly prioritizing offensive weakening of our security systems rather than encouraging business to beef up their security systems. It's all about, you know, how do we weaken encryption? How do we put back doors and things? That's the only narrative we ever hear. We never hear anyone saying, hey guys, we're living in a completely different world. We need to start beefing up our encryption. We need to start really protecting ourselves, because the government doesn't want that narrative. They don't want businesses beefing up their security. It's a lot easier for them to have companies with really weak security so that they can keep getting access to all kinds of information, and then just go after Bitcoin. You know, you kill two birds with one stone. You get rid of security and privacy for the individual, and you also kill sovereign money for the people. So it's just a really sad state of affairs, and I think a lot of crypto people see straight through it. But Adam, I'll throw to you for your thoughts.
Yeah, I think that the credulous view of this is that they don't know what they're doing and they're targeting the wrong thing because they need to do something. I think the more skeptical viewpoint is that the government, not just our government, governments in general in the modern era, appear to be in the business of intentionally looking at problems, picking the thing that they wanted to do anyways, and then using the problem to justify that solution, even if it does nothing to actually resolve the underlying issue. I think you can look at that in the world of crypto across just a myriad examples. And I think it's particularly well encapsulated in this example with ransomware. You know, again, like these problems only come up whenever there's something that they actually want to do with them, as opposed to because this is actually the solution to the problem. So it is definitely frustrating, Naomi. I can relate with you on that, but I don't think we're going to see anything like this change. What do you think, Zach?
Yeah, I think that is a good summation. I think, you know, I hate to be that guy who's like, this is a branding issue for Bitcoin, right? You know, this is about the narrative around Bitcoin. And I think this is an example of where Bitcoin has really been ill-served by not having a clear, concise brand around why it's a value. And I think what has happened here on Capitol Hill is that the Bitcoin brand has been closely associated with the ransomware brand, and that's a bad place for Bitcoin to be. And now we're seeing some ramifications of it, and that's kind of the sad state of affairs of where we are in terms of Capitol Hill legislation. So interesting to see again the continued can never say that word, politicalization of Bitcoin, and this is another example of that. But yeah, back to you, Jim.
Well, when we talk about the branding of Bitcoin, Zach, do you think that just goes back to the mainstream narrative around Bitcoin? I mean, like, do you think that takes us back to the Silk Road and just what people have heard about Bitcoin and the mainstream going from the Silk Road to now?
It could be, yeah. I mean, it could be the Silk Road thing, but with a modern, updated twist. Colonial Pipeline, I think, helped cement that over the summer. But very curious for Naomi's thoughts on this, just for her historical perspective.
Yeah, I think that it's no different from the way the media has portrayed Bitcoin in the past. Right from the start, as soon as it became a threat, they started to smear it in the press. I mean, it's interesting. You've kind of seen this all throughout history. There are lots of examples you could cite where something becomes a threat and then the government smears it because it's a threat, right? And like, I know Jeffrey Tucker's talked a lot about like the railway analogy, but we won't dive into that. I mean, what I will say is that it has evolved and they're choosing whatever the threat of the day is and they're appropriating it and then applying that to Bitcoin. So early, there was no talk of ransomware at all. It was all about drugs. And it was about like sex trafficking. There was a lot of sex trafficking talk in the early Bitcoin days. And, obviously before that, the mainstream media weren't even talking about it. It was maybe you'd hear about it on some threads. It's just, comical, magic internet money. Let's not take this seriously. As soon as it became a threat, though, immediately it was about the drugs. Every hearing was about drugs. They framed Charlie Shrem as this center person that we need to crack down on. That's why we should have a bit license in New York. Then you had Ross Ulbricht as this center, straw man for this whole movement. And, it's just migrated to its new form. Now it's ransomware. They're going to choose another thing if ransomware gets under control. And Bitcoin is always going to be the enemy because it is the enemy of the state. Let's be honest about that.